forks go still on the table. We are sitting under the vines I planted with my own hands, 20 people's worth of candles burning low, and every person at that table besides me still believes I am the woman who fixes hymns for a living. Margot is already halfway out of her chair, her voice shaking with something between fury and disbelief. "You have been lying to all of us," she says, "playing us for fools while you sat there and watched from the shadows." I do not move. "I never lied, Margot," I tell her, steadier than I feel. "I just stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. Nobody touches a wine glass. My own daughter is looking at me across that table like she does not know which side of the room she belongs on anymore." That is the exact moment I understand there is no going back to the woman I had been pretending to be. But before I tell you how we ended up at that table, you should know who I actually am. My name is Corinne Hadley. Most people who really know me just call me Cora. I am 61 years old, and for the better part of my life, nobody looked at me twice. If you are listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. I love knowing how far these stories travel before they land on someone who needed to hear one. And please, stay with me until the end, because where this story goes, you will not see coming, not even after what I just showed you. Let me take you back to where it really started. Not the vineyard, not the money. It started in the spring of 1955, on an ordinary Tuesday, with a phone call that changed everything before my daughter was old enough to remember her father's face. Earl worked construction, good with his hands, better with people, the kind of man who could talk a stranger into helping him carry a couch up 3 flights of stairs and have them thank him for the privilege. That week, a crew was short-handed on a job outside town, and the extra shift paid time and a half, which back then felt like a fortune. He took it without telling me twice. A scaffold gave way that afternoon. I was folding laundry when the call came. Bridget was 4 years old, playing with a set of plastic horses on the kitchen floor, and I remember looking at her and thinking I had absolutely no idea how I was going to do this alone. But I did it. I found work-altering clothes at a dry cleaner on 4th Street, hemming prom dresses and taking in suits for men who never once asked my name. I sewed at the counter during the day and at my kitchen table at night, chalk dust under my fingernails, a pincushion strapped to my wrist like a piece of jewelry I never chose. Some winters I patched Bridget's coat instead of buying a new one and told her it was the style now. Distressed denim before Destiny was a thing rich kids paid extra for. When Bridget begged to do a 2-week art camp the summer she turned 12, more than I made in a month at the register, I picked up weekend shifts doing wedding dress fittings on top of everything else until it was paid in full, and never told her how close we came to not managing it. She never went without. That part mattered to me more than anything else in the world. The only thing Earl left behind besides Whitbridge was 5 acres of land, out past the county line, rocky, iron dry, the kind of dirt where nothing decent had ever grown. His grandfather had bought it decades earlier for almost nothing, and it had sat untouched ever since. Neighbors used to tell me to sell it before the taxes ate me alive. One man offered me $800 for the whole parcel and seemed offended when I said I needed to think about it. I did not sell. I could not have told you why at the time. It just felt like the last thing of his I had left, and I was not ready to let go of it yet. In 2008, a woman named Bess Okafor came into the dry cleaner with a wedding dress that needed taking in at the waist. Bess was not an easy woman to say no to. She had a laugh that filled the whole shop and opinions about everything from tire pressure to church potlucks. She talked while I pinned, the way people do when someone is kneeling in front of them with a mouth full of pins and cannot easily argue back. She mentioned she made wine for a living, small batches, mostly for herself and friends. I mentioned, almost as a joke, that I owned 5 acres nobody had ever managed to grow so much as a decent tomato on. She asked what kind of soil. I told her rocky and mean and practically useless. She put down her coffee and asked if she could come see it that weekend. It turns out mean, rocky soil is exactly what certain grapevines want. The worse the ground treats the roots, the harder the vine has to work, and the harder it works, the more concentrated and complicated the fruit becomes. Bess planted a few test rows that fall on land everybody else had written off, including me. For 12 years, it stayed small and quiet, a handful of rows, most of the fruit sold off under someone else's label just to cover the property taxes and keep something alive that Earl never got to see planted. Bridget knew in the vague way grown children know things about their parents they have stopped asking about. She never once asked to see it. She married Dalton Renshaw in 2016. His family had money that had been money for 3 generations, the kind that does not talk about itself, but expects everyone else to notice anyway. A week before the wedding, Bridget asked me, gently, if I could just tell people I worked in textiles, instead of saying I did alterations at a dry cleaner. It sounds more polished, she said. I told her whatever made her comfortable. At the reception, I was seated at a table near the kitchen doors with 2 cousins nobody could place and a college roommate who had clearly been invited out of guilt. Something shifted after that wedding. I could not tell you the exact week it happened. The calls that used to come twice a week turned once a month, then less. When my granddaughter Wren was born 3 years later, I found out by text message, 2 days after the fact, with an apology attached for the delay. I told myself Bridget was building a life, a marriage, a career, and that busy daughters forget to call their mothers sometimes. I did not let myself consider any other reason. Not back then. The last 6 years are the ones I never told her about. That is when the wine finally started winning small regional awards, when Bess and I stopped selling our fruit off to other labels and bottled something worth putting our own name on. We called the label Aldrich Schellers, after the name I was born with, a name nobody at Bridget's wedding had ever once heard me use, and built a small list people waited years to get invited onto. That is when Fallow Creek Vineyard stopped being a plot of land nobody wanted and became 18 acres of Cabernet. Most of it bought up around Earl's original 5 once people started paying attention to what we were making. I helped design the tasting room board by board and built a guest cottage with 4 bedrooms, extra rooms on purpose, just in case my family ever wanted to come stay. They wanted to come stay, just not with me. The text came in at 2 a.m, the kind of hour that makes everything feel heavier than it probably is. Mom, I think it is better if you sit this trip out. Dalton's parents are coming, and someone important from his father's company is joining us too. So we are keeping the group small. I hope you understand. I read it twice, sitting up in the dark, the blue light of the screen, the only thing lit in the whole house. My daughter had just uninvited me from my own vineyard. The same rocky 5 acres was nobody else had wanted, and she had no idea. This was not the first time. Last Christmas, they had claimed the house was too small. Wren's school pageant, I only found out about after it happened, with a quick apology about how it had all been such a blur. I typed back the only thing I could think to say. Have a wonderful time, sweetheart. Then I sat there a long moment with the phone in my hand, and for the first time in years, I stopped telling myself it did not mean anything. I did not sleep much that night either. I thought about simply calling her back and telling her the truth, ending this before it even started. But something in me, some old, stubborn seamstress's instinct for taking a good hard look at a seam before deciding whether to rip it out, told me I needed to see this stitched, not guess at it. I picked up my phone again and called Roz, who runs the property for me and is one of exactly 2 people who know who I really am there. Book me a room, I told her, under Corinne Aldrich, and Roz, do not tell a single soul I am coming. 3 days later, I would be standing in the parking lot of my own vineyard as a stranger, about to find out exactly what my daughter thought of me when she believed I was not in the room. Roz met me at the gate before the sun was even all the way up, that quiet gray hour that still smells like the night before. She has run the day-to-day at Fallow Creek for 6 years now, and she is one of exactly 2 people on this entire property who know that Corinne Aldrich and the name on the deed are the same woman. The other is Bess, and Bess was 3 states away that week judging a wine competition, blissfully unaware of what I was about to put myself through. You look like you didn't sleep, Roz said, handing me coffee before I had both feet out of the car. I didn't, I told her. Not really. We walked the property together the way we always do before a big weekend. Roz running numbers off her tablet while I only half listened, because I know every inch of that land better than I know my own hands at this point. I designed the guest cottage myself, 4 bedrooms, hallways wide enough for a wheelchair someday if it ever came to that. A kitchen table built to seat 10 people comfortably, because I like the idea of it being full one day. Funny, the things you build for a family that has no idea any of it was built for them. The vines were already deep into harvest color that week, that particular rust and gold that only shows up for about 10 days a year if the weather cooperates. And I remember thinking, the way I think most Octobers, that Earl would have had no idea what to do with any of this. He was a scaffolding and drywall man. He never planted so much as a tomato in his whole life. I like to think he would have liked the smell of it anyway. Crushed fruit and diesel off the tractor, and the first cold snap of morning all mixed together. I want to stay Corinne Aldrich this week, I told Roz. A consultant here early to review the guest experience ahead of the fall inspection. Nobody outside you and Bess breathes a word otherwise, not even Milo. Roz did not ask why. 6 years working for me has taught her that when I go quiet like that, there is a reason underneath it I am not ready to hand over yet. She just nodded, said she would brief the front desk on the cover story, and made sure my usual suite stayed marked unavailable so nobody bungle stumbled across a name on a screen they might recognize. The Renshaws checked in 2 days later, and it was not the calm arrival I had pictured. Holt had invited a man named Neil Ashby up from the city at the last minute, some investor he clearly needed on his side, judging by how many times Holt said the word opportunity in under a minute at the front desk. I found out later that Renshaw Properties has a development stalled out on a loan that was not looking friendly anymore. At the time, all I knew was that Milo was scrambling because Neil Ashby needed a room that was not part of the original booking, and the only one available on short notice happened to be the one we always keep off the books for me. I watched the whole thing from a bench near the fountain, sunglasses on, a folder of fake inspection notes in my lap that I never once opened. Bridget stood off to the side looking wiped out already, and it was not even noon yet. Dalton kept checking his phone the way men do when they are trying to look calm about something that is anything but. Margot, in a white linen dress that had clearly never been within 10 feet of actual dirt, told Milo in a voice that carried the whole length of the courtyard that she simply did not understand how a property at this price point could be so disorganized. Milo apologized, found Neil Ashby a room in the cottage instead, and the whole thing sorted itself out inside of 20 minutes, though Margot kept the wounded look on her face considerably longer than that. Wren, all of 7 years old, spent the entire check-in crouched by the fountain trying to catch a lizard, completely unbothered by any of it. At one point, she gave up on the lizard, looked straight over at me, sitting there in my sunglasses, and asked if I knew where it went. I told her lizards are smarter than they look, and were probably watching us both from somewhere safe right now. She thought that was a very satisfying answer, nodded once like a tiny judge delivering a verdict, and went back to the fountain. Nobody introduced us. I did not give her a name, and she did not ask for one. I liked her before we had even properly spoken to each other. At one point, Bridget walked past my bench, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her sleeve. She glanced my way, the polite half smile you give a stranger, and said the property was even prettier than the photos online, wasn't it? I agreed that it was. She asked, sort of absently, if I was staying at the cottage too, and I said no, just up for work. She said that sounded nice. Getting to visit somewhere like this for work. No bitterness in it at all, just a kind of tired envy, before Wren called her back toward the fountain and she went. She had no idea she was talking to the woman who had picked out every single stone in that fountain, and I had to look down at my folder for a second before I trusted my own face. That first night, I had Roz seat me at Harvest House, our restaurant on the property, at a corner table half tucked behind a row of potted olive trees, close enough to hear, far enough to be forgettable. The Renshaws were sat almost dead center, the kind of table you give people you want to keep happy. I ordered the trout and nursed a glass of our own Cabernet slowly enough to make it look like a whole evening. Neil Ashby, trying to make conversation, asked Margot if she had a favorite winery. Oh, we're on the list for Aldrich Cellars, Margot said, like she was announcing a title. Have been for years. You cannot just walk in and buy that wine, you know. You have to be invited onto the allocation, and even then it takes forever to get bumped up to the good vintages. Holt and I keep saying we need to actually visit the estate one of these years, but our trips never quite line up. Holt used the opening to steer things toward business, the way he steers most conversations toward business, mentioning a parcel near the coast. He thought Neil ought to get in on early. Phrases like tremendous upside and once in a Wajaja ocean floating across the table like they cost nothing to say. Neil Ashby smiled the non-committal smile of a man who has heard 100 pitches and has not yet decided if this is the one he says yes to. I nearly choked on a piece of trout. 6 years of small regional medals and a waitlist Bess had built one careful relationship at a time. And here was a woman bragging about owning a piece of it to a man she was trying to impress, with absolutely no idea she was sitting 40 feet from the person who decided which vintages made that list in the first place. The conversation drifted, the way dinner conversation does, and somehow it landed on Bridget's side of the family. Neil Ashby asked a polite question about where Bridget grew up. Bridget mentioned a little too quickly that her mother used to do alterations work, sewing mostly, nothing fancy. Margot laughed, not unkindly on the surface, the kind of laugh built to sound warm from across a room. Oh, Carol, bless her, Margot said. And I went very still hearing my own name gotten wrong, whether on purpose or from simply never having bothered to learn it right. Cora? Bridget corrected quietly. Cora, sorry, Margot said, waving a hand like the name itself was the inconvenience. She's a hard worker, I'll give her that. I just always say, Bridget, you were destined for something a little more, and look at you now. Bridget laughed. It was a small laugh, closer to a wince than anything else, but it was still a laugh, and she did not correct Margot the way I might have hoped, and she did not stop it either. Dalton studied his wine list very intently. I sat behind my olive trees with my fork halfway to my mouth and reminded myself, the way I had been reminding myself for 6 years now, that I did not need a single person at that table to know who I was in order for it to be true. I told myself that. I am not sure how much of me believed it. The next morning, I was at the concierge desk with Milo, going over week's activity sign-ups as part of my supposed review, when Margot came marching up in a fresh outfit and reading glasses pushed up into her hair. I need to move my granddaughters Wednesday and Thursday, she told Milo. Put her in the morning trail rides instead of that little art class. Riding is a much better use of her time, and frankly, it photographs better too. Milo glanced toward Bridget, trailing a few steps behind with Wren's hand in hers. Wren's whole face folded in on itself the second she heard the word riding. She tugged on Bridget's hand and said very quietly, "But I already signed up for the Leaf ones," in the small, precise voice of a kid presenting evidence she already half suspects will not matter. It did not. She had been talking about Songbird Garden the entire drive up, something about wanting to draw the grape leaves before they changed color, or so Bridget had mentioned a check in the day before. Bridget opened her mouth. I watched her do it. For half a second, I actually thought she might say something, and something in my chest lifted at the possibility of it. Then she closed her mouth again and said only, "Sure, Margot, whatever you think is best," in the flat voice of someone who has said that exact sentence 100 times before and stopped expecting it to cost her anything. Milo made the change. Wren did not argue, but she let go of her mother's hand and walked a few steps ahead of everyone the rest of the way to the car, the particular quiet that 7-year-olds go when they have already learned that arguing does not work. I told myself to stay out of it, watch and learn and keep my mouth shut. That was the whole plan, and I meant to stick to it right up until early that afternoon, when Bridget came back to the desk alone, looking wrung out from an hour of small talk with Neil Ashby's wife, and asked Milo if there was anything open for Wren before dinner. "Something easy," she said. "Let her pick this time." Wren picked Songbird Garden without a second of hesitation. I made sure I was there when she walked in. sitting cross-legged at one of the little tables with a magnifying glass and an open field journal, doing my best impression of a woman with nothing better to do than look at ladybugs. Paloma, who runs the program and has no idea who I am beyond a friendly regular who wanders in sometimes, introduced us without any ceremony at all. "This is Miss Corinne," Paloma said. "She knows a lot about the garden." Wren looked at me the serious, appraising way 7-year-olds look at new adults, deciding in real time whether you are worth the trouble. "Do you know why the grape leaves turn red before they fall?" she asked. "No hello first, straight to business." I told her it had something to do with the vine pulling all its sugar back down into the roots for winter, saving up its strength. She considered that answer for a moment, like she was filing it away for later, then sat down next to me and got to work on a leaf of her own, tongue between her teeth in concentration. I did not tell her my name was not really Corinne. I did not tell her that her grandmother had built the very cottage her family was sleeping in, board by board, out a wish that they would fill it up together someday. I just sat there in the shade with my granddaughter, both of us drawing grape leaves, and let myself have that much at least, before anything else had to change. It was such a small thing. An hour with a magnifying glass and a bored 7-year-old who did not know my name yet. I had no idea yet how hard I was going to need to hold on to exactly how that hour felt before the week got away from me. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm I had not expected and was in no hurry to examine too closely. Wren found her way to Songbird Garden most afternoons, sometimes with Bridget dropping her off and rushing back to whatever the Renshaws had scheduled, sometimes with a member of the resort staff walking her over after her morning trail ride, which she still went on without complaint, though she never once mentioned it to me unprompted. I noticed that. A kid who talks your ear off about leaf shapes and lizard hiding spots, but goes quiet about horses, is a kid telling you something, even if she does not know she is telling you anything at all. On Tuesday, she brought me a drawing of the fountain, colored in with a green so aggressive it barely resembled water, and informed me she had given the lizard a name, Gerald, on the theory that any creature clever enough to disappear that fast deserved some dignity. On Wednesday, she asked me, out of nowhere, whether grown-ups were allowed to have two names, because her mom sometimes got called something different by Grandma Margot than what everyone else called her. I told her that sometimes people get called different things by different people, and it does not always mean anything. She looked unconvinced. The particular way 7-year-olds look unconvinced when they can tell an adult is dodging a good question. But she let it go and went back to her drawing. On Friday, she asked, out of nowhere, the way she asks most of her best questions, if I had ever had a dad, because her friend at school said everyone has one somewhere, even if they are not around anymore. I told her I had once, a long time ago, and that his name was Earl, and he laughed loud enough to fill up a whole room. She asked what happened to him. I told her he had an accident at work when I was young and my daughter was very small, younger than she was now, and that I still missed him some days more than others. She sat with that a minute, tracing a leaf outline with her pencil, then said, matter of fact, that Gerald probably missed his lizard family too, and went back to her drawing. I did not correct her. I did not need to. She had understood something true and simply wrapped it around a lizard to say it, and I let her have it that way. I caught a glimpse of Dalton once that same week, off by himself near the equipment shed, while everyone else was at the pool, turning a grape leaf over in his hands, like it might tell him something useful if he looked at it long enough. He did not know I was watching. He put it down eventually, checked his phone, and walked back toward the main house with his shoulders set in the particular way of a man rehearsing a conversation he does not want to have. I did not know yet what that conversation was going to be about. I only knew he looked like someone carrying something a good deal heavier than a grape leaf. I had stopped wearing my sunglasses inside the garden classroom weeks earlier, back when I first started stopping by on my own visits, long before this week. They made the kids nervous, like I was hiding something, which I suppose I was, just not from them. That same week, I spent an evening out past the tasting room by myself, tying back a row of vines that did not, strictly speaking, need my attention. It is an older row, planted the same year Bridget finished college, though nobody on the harvest crew now was even hired yet when we put those first canes in the ground. I remember planting it more clearly than I remember almost anything else from that year. Bess drove up with a truck bed full of rootstock, and we worked until it was too dark to see the rows anymore. Just the two of us, because I could not afford a crew yet, and would not have wanted one there even if I could. I kept thinking about Bridget crossing a stage a few states away in a cap and gown, at a ceremony I could not get away from work to attend properly. And I remember deciding, somewhere around the third row, that this patch of dirt was going to mean something someday, whether anyone else ever knew it or not. I keep a small wooden stake at the end of it with nothing carved into it but a year, 2013, no name, because I never could decide what to call it that felt honest. And every fall I go out and tie it back myself, instead of letting the crew handle it like every other row on the property. Paloma found me out there on her way to lock up the garden shed and asked not unkindly if that row was special somehow. I told her it was just an old habit. She did not push, and I did not explain, because explaining would have meant saying my daughter's name out loud in a place where I had spent a week, making sure said it in connection with me at all. Thursday afternoon, Bridget came to collect Wren herself instead of sending someone from the front desk, which she had not done all week. I was crouched at the little craft table, fixing the strap on Wren's backpack, which had torn loose from the buckle sometime that morning. Needle and a bit of waxed thread I always keep in my bag out of habit. In and out, in and out. The same 3-stitch pattern I have used my whole life because it holds better than anything you can buy already sewn. I did not hear her come in. I heard her stop instead. That particular kind of stopping mid-step that changes the air in a room. The garden classroom was mostly empty that hour, just Wren finishing a worksheet at the far table, and Paloma somewhere in back restocking magnifying glasses, sunlight coming low and gold through the greenhouse panels the way it does late on an October afternoon. "Mom," she said, and her voice did not sound anything like the voice she had used on me at the fountain 3 days earlier. It came out smaller and a lot more frightened. I finished the stitch before I looked up. Some habits you do not break just because your entire cover story is falling apart over a torn backpack strap. Bridget did not wait for Wren to notice anything was wrong before pulling me by the elbow out into the hallway, gentle enough that would not think twice about it, firm enough that I understood exactly how not gentle she wanted to be. "What are you doing here?" she said. Her voice dropped to something just above a whisper and twice as sharp for it. "Are you following us? Is this some kind of, I don't even know what this is, some kind of stunt?" "I am not following anyone, Bridget," I said. "I told you at the fountain. I am here for work." "Work," she repeated, like the word itself was an insult. "You do alterations at a dry cleaner, Mom. You do not do consulting work at a resort that costs more a night than most people's rent. And now you are running some kind of nature program for my daughter under a made-up name." "It is not a made-up name," I said, which was true in the smallest, most technical way possible, and I watched her decide not to believe me anyway, and I could hardly blame her for that. Bridget shook her head slowly, like she was trying to physically shake the whole conversation loose from it. "None of this makes any sense," she said. "Why would you even want to work here, of all places, using a name I have never once heard you use in your life?" "Because it is quiet," I said, a small, evasive kind of honesty, the only kind I had left to offer her right then. Wren appeared in the doorway then, the backpack fixed now and slung over one shoulder, looking between the two of us with the specific alertness kids get when adults think they are being subtle and are not. "Everything okay?" she asked, in a voice trying very hard to sound casual and not quite landing it. "Everything is fine, sweetheart," Bridget said, too fast, too bright. "Go grab your jacket. We are heading back." Wren looked at me a half-second longer than she needed to before she went, like she was filing this away too, the same way she had filed away the fact about the leaves turning red, something to take out and look at more closely once she had more information. Once Wren was out of earshot, Bridget turned back to me, arms crossed so tight I could see the tendons standing up in her forearms. "I do not know what you are trying to prove," she said, "showing up wherever we go. playing house with my daughter under some other name. If you wanted to see her, you could have called. You could have just asked. Could I said, and I did not manage to keep all the edge out of it. When was the last time you made that easy, Bridget? She flinched, just slightly, and for a second I thought I had actually reached something. Then her jaw set the way it does when she has already decided a conversation is over before it has technically ended. I need you to stay away from her for the rest of the week, she said. I mean it. I cannot deal with this on top of everything else right now. For just a second, something cracked in her voice underneath the anger, something closer to panic than irritation. And it occurred to me that whatever was going on with Dalton and his father was sitting on her shoulders too, whether anyone had actually told her the details or not. Then she caught herself, straightened up, and the crack sealed back over like it had never happened. On top of what? I asked, because I already had a piece of it. The loan, the parcel Holt kept pitching, Neil Ashby's non-committal smile. But I wanted to see if she would hand any of it to me herself. She did not. She only said, "It is complicated, Mom." The same three words I imagine she has been reaching for her whole life whenever the truth got inconvenient, and walked off to find her daughter, leaving me standing in a hallway I had built with money she did not know I had, holding a spool of thread in a hand that would not quite stop shaking. I found out only weeks later, from Wren herself, that she had asked her mother in the car that afternoon why Miss Corinne had looked so upset. And Bridget had told her only that it was complicated, the exact same words, and Wren had accepted it the way kids accept most unsatisfying adult answers, filed and set aside, at least for the time being. That night I sat on the porch of my own guest cottage, the one built for a family currently asleep 40 yards away with no idea whose roof they were actually under, and I called Roz even though it was well past 10. "I think I am done hiding," I told her. Roz did not ask if I was sure, which I appreciated because I was not entirely sure, not the way you are sure about a recipe or a delivery date. She has known me long enough to know that when I finally say a thing like that out loud, I have usually already been circling it for days, and there is no version of that conversation where she talks me out of it, only versions where she makes sure I have thought it through enough to survive whatever comes after. What she asked instead was whether I wanted this to be about winning. I sat with that question longer than I expected to. No, I told her eventually. I do not want to win anything. I just cannot keep letting my granddaughter watch me lie to her mother's face, even a small lie, even a kind one. She is 7 years old and already better at reading a room than half the adults I know. Roz said she would have Emery clear the private dining room for whichever night I wanted. No questions asked. I thanked her and sat out there a while longer after we hung up, looking at the dark shape of the vines running down toward the creek. One row in particular I did not need any light to find. I was not doing this to punish anyone. I want to be clear about that. Looking back, even knowing how it must have looked from the other side of that table 2 nights later, I was doing it because a 7-year-old girl had looked at me sideways in a doorway and known without a single fact to go on that something in the room was not true. Children are better at that than we give them credit for. I decided, sitting on that porch, that I owed her better than being one more adult who taught her to look away from it. The invitations went out 2 mornings later, delivered by hand to each of their doors before breakfast. Heavy cream cardstock with Fallow Creek's crest, embossed at the top and nothing underneath it but a time, an evening, and the words, "From the owner." Roz told me afterward that Bridget had turned hers over twice looking for a name that was not there, and that Margot had assumed, out loud in the hallway, that it must be some kind of loyalty perk for members of the wine club. I spent that whole day the way I imagine most people spend the day before surgery, doing ordinary things very slowly, tasting a sauce I did not need to taste, straightening silverware that was already straight. Emery ran the kitchen like it was any other Tuesday, which I appreciated more than I told him at the time, chopping herbs with the specific calm of a man who has decided panicking will not get dinner out any faster. Roz kept finding small reasons to walk past me and say nothing in particular, just checking. The way you check on someone standing too close to a ledge, even when you trust they're not going to jump. By 6 o'clock, the long table was set out under the pergola, at the edge of the oldest block of vines, white cloth, low candles, the evening breeze kept threatening to take. There were more places set than I actually needed for 6 people, because some habits about setting a table for a full family do not go away just because that family has never once actually sat at it together. They came up the path a little after 7. Holt led the way in a blazer he had clearly packed for exactly this kind of surprise invitation. Margot beside him, already speculating about which winery had booked them. Dalton a step behind with Wren's hand in his. Bridget trailing last, arms crossed against the evening chill or against something else. I could not have told you which at the time. The light was doing that particular thing it does out here in October, going gold and then bruised purple within about 20 minutes, and the whole path was lit with little lanterns. Roz had strung along the fence posts that afternoon, on my instruction, because if I was going to do this, I at least wanted it to look like something worth remembering. Holt was saying something to Dalton about the crest on the invitation, some comment about how a property this size probably ran 8 figures easy, completely unaware of how close he was standing to being right. I stood up from the table when they reached it. I did not sit back down. Margot saw me half a second before Bridget did, and her expression moved through something complicated and fast, confusion first, then something that looked almost like recalculation, like she was already trying to work out where this new information should be filed. Cora, Bridget said, and it was not a question so much as an exhale, the sound of someone confirming a thing they had already half suspected and had been dreading confirming. Please, sit, I said, all of you. I promise the food is better than the introduction is about to be. Nobody sat. Holt looked between his wife and me and back again, clearly trying to locate the joke. I am Cora Hadley, I told them, since apparently that needed saying out loud. I own Fallow Creek. All of it, the tasting room, the cottage you have been sleeping in all week, the wine you have been drinking for years without knowing it, Margot. I have owned it for a long time. Dalton was the first to actually move, taking one step backward like the ground had shifted slightly under the pergola, his eyes going from me to Bridget and back and already doing the math on every conversation he had ever half listened to about his wife's mother. It was Wren who spoke first, while every adult at the table was still working out which direction to point their shock. She tugged on Bridget's sleeve and looked up at her, not at me, with the very direct, very serious face she gets when she has decided your question cannot wait one more second. Is she my grandma? She asked. Like actually my grandma, not just Miss Corinne from the garden. Bridget did not answer right away, which was, in its own way, an answer. Yes, I said when nobody else did. I am your mother's mother, Wren. I have been for a long time. I am sorry it took this long for someone to tell you properly. That seemed to be the exact moment Margot found her voice again, and she did not spend it on Wren. You have been lying to all of us, she said, already halfway out of her chair, playing us for fools while you sat there and watched from the shadows. All that time in that little garden with my granddaughter, letting us think you were some employee. I did not move. I never lied, Margot, I told her, steadier than I felt. I just stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. Nobody touched a wine glass. Bridget was looking at me across that table, like she did not know which side of the room she belonged on anymore, and I understood, in that exact second, that there was no version of tonight where I got to go back to being the woman I had spent the week pretending to be. Margot was still building up a full head of steam when Holt, trying to be useful, the way men like Holt try to be useful, said the one word out loud that undid her before she got the chance to finish her own sentence. Aldrich, he said slowly, looking at the label on the bottle already open on the table, the one Roz had poured before anyone arrived. Aldrich Cellars. That's not, he looked at me, that can't be the same. It's the same, I said. I was born Corinne Aldrich. I only became a Hadley when I married. I kept the name on the label because it belonged to a version of myself nobody in this family ever had to know about. I thought watching her about the exact words she had used at dinner 3 nights earlier. You cannot just walk in and buy that wine. You have to be invited onto the allocation. And I wondered if she was thinking about them too, or if her mind had already moved on to whatever version of this story she was going to tell herself by morning. Marjot's face did something I had genuinely never watched a human face do before. Several expressions trying to occupy the same square inch of real estate at once. It took her a long moment to find any words at all, and when she did, they came out smaller than anything she had said all week. "We're on the list," she said, mostly to herself. "We've been on the list for 6 years." "I know, Marjot," I said. "I approved it myself." Nobody said anything for a few seconds after that. Somewhere past the pergola, a bird I could not identify made a single sharp call and went quiet again, and I remember being grateful for it. Some small, ordinary sound in the middle of all that silence, proof the rest of the world had not stopped just because ours had. Holt recovered faster than his wife did, which did not surprise me. Men like Holt have a lot of practice turning shock into opportunity before the shock has even finished landing. "Well," he said, straightening his jacket like that might straighten the conversation too. "This changes things. Cora, if that's really your name, Renshaw Properties could use a partner like you. We've got a coastal parcel that, with the right backing, could really. I know about the loan, Holt," I said before he could finish. "I've known for 2 days." That stopped him in a way the wine reveal had not quite managed. Dalton flinched just slightly, the particular flinch of a man watching his father do the exact thing he had probably begged him not to do. He did not say anything. I got the sense, watching him, that he rarely did in that family, and that the not saying anything had cost him plenty over the years, even if nobody had ever thanked him for the silence. I did not say anything else about the loan. I did not offer to help, and I did not tell him no, because I genuinely had not decided yet, and I was not going to make that decision, standing at a table where his wife, 3 feet away, had just learned her whole life had been rearranged around a lie. I picked up my water glass instead and looked at Bridget. Wren had gone very quiet during all of this, pressed into Dalton's side, watching her mother's face the way she watches most things, carefully, like she was going to be tested on it later. I almost stopped there. I almost let the night end on the wine and the loan, instead of pushing further into the one thing I actually needed to know. But I looked at my granddaughter, watching her mother hold herself together by sheer force of will, and I thought about every dinner I had ever sat through, pretending things were fine for someone else's comfort, and I decided Wren deserved to grow up in a family that did not do that anymore, even if it cost us something tonight to start. "Bridget," I said, and my voice came out gentler than I expected it to, given everything. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually sit with the answer instead of giving me the easy one." She nodded, arms still crossed, eyes wet but not yet spilling over. "After Wren was born," I said, "the calls stopped, not all at once. Slowly, the way water leaves a glass, nobody is filling back up. I told myself for years you were just busy, building a life, and that was probably some of it. But I need to know if someone ever told you I wanted less from you. If someone ever told you I said that." The silence that followed had a different texture than any of the silences before it. "Marjot," Bridget said slowly, turning, her voice climbing before she had even fully decided to be angry. "After Wren was born, you told me Mom said she didn't want to overwhelm us, that she thought we should focus on our own little family for a while. You said she told you that on the phone." "I never called Marjot after Wren was born," I said. "I've never once, in the entire time you've been married, called your mother-in-law on the telephone." Marjot's chin lifted, that particular posture of a woman about to explain her way out of something rather than apologize for it. "I may have paraphrased a general sense of things," she said. "Mothers give their daughters a little space sometimes, Bridget." "I thought I was helping." "Helping who?" Bridget said. "Because I remember calling you crying the week after Wren was born, telling you I felt like I was drowning, and I did not know how to reach my own mother because I thought she had asked for distance. I remember you telling me to give it time. You knew exactly what you were letting me believe every single time I brought it up since." "You lied to me," Bridget said, and her voice cracked wide open on the word lied. "9 years," she said, looking between Marjot and me now. 9 years I thought you'd pulled away from me, and the whole time you were right there, and someone else decided that wasn't going to happen. It was the first time all week I had watched my daughter, turn the full weight of her anger towards someone who was not me. Wren slipped off her chair and went and stood next to Bridget without anyone telling her to. Small hand finding the hem of her mother's sleeve, not saying anything, just there, the way kids sometimes know exactly what to do, even when every adult in the room has forgotten. I should say, looking back, that I was not entirely innocent across those 9 years either. I could have called more. I could have shown up uninvited the way I eventually did anyway, just years too late to matter as much. But watching my daughter say those words out loud, something that had lived in my chest like a stone for the better part of a decade, finally had somewhere to go besides, straight through me. I let that sit in the air a moment before I spoke again, because some things need room before you can put anything gentler on top of them. There is a row of vines past the tasting room, I said, older than most of the rest. I planted it myself the year you graduated, the same week actually, because I could not get away from 2 jobs to make it to your ceremony, and I needed to do something with my hands that meant the same thing. It's small, maybe 40 vines, nothing that would ever show up on a spec sheet or a tasting note, but it produces some of the best fruit on the whole property, every single year, better than rows twice its size that get twice the attention. Nobody on the crew even knows why it is there. I never told a single person what it was called in my own head all these years. What is it called? Wren asked, before anyone else could, because she is the only person at that table who has never once been afraid to just ask the question everyone else is circling. Bridget's row, I said. I watched my daughter's face come apart in a completely different way than it had 30 seconds earlier, the anger draining out to make room for something with no good short name. Bridget did not say anything for a long moment. She just reached out and put her hand flat on the table, like she needed something solid under it, and asked, very quietly, if she could see the row before they left in the morning. I told her I would take her myself first thing, before anyone else was even awake. Margot stood up so fast, her chair nearly went over backward on the gravel. I am not going to sit here and be made the villain of somebody else's dinner theater, she said. Holt, we're leaving. Holt looked, for one brief second, like he might actually stay, might actually say something worth saying. Then 40 years of practice took over, and he stood too, folding his napkin with the exact same precision he probably uses in every meeting where he needs to look calmer than he feels. Bridget, he said, call us when you've had time to think clearly. He looked at Dalton on his way past, some silent instruction passing between them that Dalton did not follow. Dalton stayed exactly where he was, one hand still resting on the back of Wren's empty chair, and for the first time all week, I saw something in his face that looked less like discomfort and more like an actual decision. Neither of them apologized. Not to Bridget, not to Wren, not to me. Margot did not so much as glance back at the table on her way down the path, and I remember thinking, watching her go, that some people would rather lose the whole relationship than lose the version of the story where they were never wrong. That left 4 of us at a table built for a family that had never once all sat down together, candles burning lower, a granddaughter who suddenly had one more name to keep straight for one grandmother, and a great deal still unsaid between the 3 adults who remained. Emery sent the food out anyway, quietly, without asking if anyone still wanted it, and there was something almost funny about the 4 of us eventually picking at trout and roasted vegetables in the wreckage of everything that had just happened, the ordinary mechanics of a meal going on, regardless of whether the people eating it had any appetite left at all. I did not know yet how much of it we would manage to actually say out loud. I only knew, watching Bridget wipe her face with the back of her hand and reach for instead of her wine glass, that whatever came next, we were finally having the right conversation, even if it took us most of the night to get all the way through it. We sat out there long after the candles burned down to nothing, the 4 of us, not saying much, Wren eventually falling asleep against Dalton's shoulder, while Bridget and I just looked at each other across a table that had finally stopped being a stage for anything. Nobody suggested going inside for a long time. I think we all needed to sit in the quiet a while before facing whatever the next day was going to ask of us. I woke before dawn out of habit more than intention, the way I have most mornings for 30 years, and found Bridget already sitting on the steps of my cottage in yesterday's clothes, a blanket from the guest room wrapped around her shoulders, waiting. You said first thing, she said. I did not want to give you a chance to change your mind. I was not going to change my mind, I told her, and we walked out past the tasting room together without saying much else. The grass still silver with dew, the whole valley doing that particular hush it does right before the sun actually clears the ridge. The row looked like nothing special in that light, honestly, just 40 vines a little older and a little more gnarled than their neighbors. The small wooden stake at the end with its carved year worn soft at the edges from 20 some Octobers of weather. Bridget crouched down next to it and ran her thumb over the numbers like she was checking they were real. You really did this the same week, she asked, while I was walking across some stage in a cap and gown you weren't even at. I was there, I said, in the parking lot mostly. I could not get a seat close enough to actually see you, and I did not want you scanning the crowd, trying to find me and feeling bad on your own graduation day when you couldn't. So I watched from the back, and then I drove 5 hours home and put these in the ground the next morning because I did not know what else to do with everything I was feeling. She was quiet a long moment, still crouched there, still touching the stake. I didn't know you came at all, she said. I always just figured work. That was easier to say to you at the time, I told her. I have not always chosen the truth when it was easier not to. I want you to know I see that, especially after last night. Does it ever go into a bottle by itself, she asked, or does it just get blended in with everything else? It has never been enough fruit on its own to bottle separately, I told her. Bess and I always folded it into the reserve blend without telling anyone which barrels it went into. Maybe that changes now. Maybe it doesn't. I had not actually thought that far ahead. She looked at the row a while longer, like she was doing some private arithmetic of her own. Maybe someday I could help pick it, she said, when it's ready. I don't know anything about grapes, but I could learn. You could, I said. I would like that quite a lot. She stood up eventually, wrapping the blanket tighter, and looked out over the rest of the vines going gold as the sun finally cleared the ridge. I let Margot tell me who you were for 9 years, she said. That is on me too, not just her. I could have called and asked you myself instead of just believing whatever made things easier at the time. I think some part of me wanted the easier version. It was simpler to think you had pulled away than to think I had let someone talk me into pulling away myself. I do not think either of those is entirely true, I said. I think we both went quiet in our own ways and told ourselves about why the other one had gone quiet first, and neither story was the whole thing. Bridget wiped her face with the back of her wrist, annoyed at herself for crying again. I kept telling myself you were the one who changed, she said, building all of this without me. It was easier than admitting I was the one who stopped showing up first, actually, if I really think about the order of things. I do not think either of us needs to win that argument, I told her. I think we both get to have been a little bit right and a little bit wrong and move forward from there instead of relitigating whose fault it was originally. Can we actually fix this? She asked, and there was something almost childlike in the way she asked it, the exact voice she used to use, asking if a scraped knee was going to be okay. I do not know, I told her honestly. I think we can try. I do not think trying looks like one conversation at sunrise fixing 9 years. I think it looks like a lot of ordinary Tuesdays where you call me back within the week instead of the month, and I actually tell you things instead of managing what version of my life you get to see. She almost laughed at that, a real one, wet around the edges. That is a very unsatisfying for a woman who apparently owns 18 acres of prime real estate, she said. I have gotten very good at unsatisfying answers, I told her. Ask anyone who has ever tried to get gossip out of Roz. That got an actual laugh out of her, short and surprised, the kind that comes out before a person has decided whether they are still allowed to laugh yet. Wren found us out there a few minutes later, still in pajamas, hair a disaster, apparently having woken up and simply followed the direction she assumed people who loved grapes would go. She surveyed the two of us standing among the vines with the particular suspicions of a child Checking whether the adults have been crying, decided we probably had and did not comment on it directly. Is this the row? She asked instead, already having apparently absorbed the entire conversation from last night through whatever channels feel 7-year-olds use to absorb things adults think they are too young to understand. This is the row, I told her. She considered it solemnly, the way she considers most important things, then announced that she thought it should get a sign, an actual sign, not just a stake with a boring number on it. She spent the next several minutes narrating increasingly elaborate design concepts involving glitter until Bridget finally laughed for real, the whole way real, and told her they would discuss signage at a later date. Dalton found me alone near the equipment shed a couple hours later. While Bridget was upstairs packing and Wren was saying an extremely thorough goodbye to Paloma and every insect in the garden individually. He stood there a minute working up to whatever he had come to say, hands in his pockets, looking younger than he had all week. I should have said something at some point, he said finally. Any point, I watched my parents treat you like an inconvenience for years and told myself it was not my place to get in the middle of it. I do not have a good excuse beyond that. You do not owe me an apology, Dalton, I said, which was mostly true. Maybe not, he said. But Bridget might at some point need me to actually be on a side, and I have gotten very comfortable not picking one. I am not saying I have fixed that. I am saying I noticed it. Finally, somewhere around the part where you mentioned the loan. I did not tell him it was fine, because I was not entirely sure yet that it was, and I have never seen the use in reassuring someone out of a discomfort that might actually do them some good. I just told him that noticing was a start, and that starts were worth something, and left it there, because neither of us seemed to want to turn it into more than it honestly was. He nodded, looked like he might say something else, then just held out his hand instead, an oddly formal gesture between two people who had just spent a week discovering how thoroughly they did not know each other. I shook it. It felt like a strange enough start to whatever we were going to become to each other, but it was a start, and I have learned not to be too particular about the shape those come in. They left by early afternoon, 2 days ahead of schedule. Bridget told me, loading the last bag into the car, that she and Wren were going to swing by my old neighborhood on the drive home, instead of flying straight back. She wanted Wren to actually see the apartment, the old dry cleaner, if it was still standing, the library where I used to take her for story hour, on the one evening a week I was not working. I do not really remember most of it, she admitted. I was so young. I want to see it through eyes that are not 4 years old this time. I gave her the address, told her the dry cleaner had closed years back, but the library was still there, still had the same slight crooked reading rugs in the children's section, and she wrote it all down in her phone like she was afraid of losing it before she got the chance to go. Wren, buckled into her car seat, wanted to know if there would be lizards at my old apartment too. I told her I honestly did not remember. It had been a long time, but that there was a very good chance, since lizards tend to show up wherever there is enough sun and not enough people paying attention. She seemed satisfied with that answer and immediately began drafting a list, out loud, of names she was prepared to use. Roz drove me back down to the main house once their car finally disappeared past the gate, and I stood in the tasting room a long while, just watching an ordinary Tuesday try to reassemble itself around me, guests coming and going, none of them with any idea what had happened under that pergola the night before. I did eventually call Holt about the loan, about 10 days later, once I had actually thought it through properly, instead of just reacting to the shock of the evening. I did not offer to bail out the coastal parcel or become anybody's silent partner. I told him I would connect him with a lending contact of mine who might look at the deal fairly, on its own merits, with no favors attached in either direction, and that whatever happened after that was between him and the numbers. It felt like the right amount of help. Not nothing, because Bridget still has to sit across a table from that man for the rest of her life, and not everything, because he had never once in 9 years tried to understand what an actual partnership with me might look like before he needed one. It has been a few weeks now since all of that. Bridget calls most Sundays, sometimes just to talk about nothing, which I have decided is its own kind of miracle. She and Ren came back up 2 weekends ago, just the two of them, and Ren spent an entire afternoon reintroducing me to Gerald the lizard, like we had not already met a dozen times. Last Sunday, she asked if she could bring a friend from school next time, someone who apparently does not believe grandmothers can own actual vineyards, and I told her I would clear my whole afternoon for the express purpose of being believed. Dalton has called twice, short, a little stiff, mostly about logistics, but he calls, which is more than he used to do. Last time he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he had started looking into consulting work outside his father's company. Nothing definite yet, just looking. I did not make a big thing out of it. Some seeds you just water quietly and leave alone. Margot and Holt have not called at all. I do not know if they will. Bridget says her mother-in-law has told several people at the club that the whole evening was, in her words, deeply misrepresented, and I have decided I am at peace not knowing what that means or trying to correct it. Some doors you leave unlocked. Whether anyone walks back through them is not entirely up to you. I will not pretend all of this feels resolved, sitting here now. Most nights I am simply tired in the good way, the way you are tired after actually using your hands on something, instead of just holding yourself together. Some nights I still reach for my phone to call Bridget about something small and stop myself, old habit, half convinced she still does not want to hear from me before I remember that particular fear does not have to run my life anymore, and call her anyway. I think about all of it sometimes, late, once the vineyard has gone quiet and there is nobody left to perform for. People ask if I regret staying quiet for so long. I don't, not really. I needed something sturdy enough to hold that kind of truth before I could say it out loud. And it took years to build one, row by row, one hard patch of land at a time. Money never fixed what silence broke. It just gave me a table long enough to say everything at once. Bridget and I are still rebuilding, slower than either of us would like. Margot and I will probably never sit at that table together, and some mornings that still stings more than I let on. But my granddaughter knows my real name now. She knows which row of vines carries her mother's and why nobody trims it like the others. That's not a fairy tale ending. It's just an honest one. And at 61, I've finally stopped apologizing for which one I'd rather have.